I want to welcome all of you tonight to this day 4 of our leadership challenge. I so appreciate every one of you who have made the time, because I know that you're all in different time zones, and yet you've made the time. And some of you, like my brother Jimmy there, I mean, he's in a really different time zone there. Is it Jimmy? You're in Malawi?
Yes, I'm in Malawi. Yeah.
Malawi. I mean, thank you, Jimmy. Honored to have you with us on the call. Um, Tonight, I'm going to talk about a leadership, and we've got more coming in. I'm going to talk about a essential quality to leadership that the minute I say it, I know everybody is going to be able to go, yeah, but it's something we want in our leaders, but it is uncomfortable to develop in our own leadership. So, and the idea behind this whole leadership essentials, where I've come with developing that course, but even in the 5-day leadership challenge, this is something that I just became aware of, and I wanted to connect with people in leaders, even those who want to aspire to leadership, because just thinking through as the human being, any human, male, female, that makes no difference, or age, but as a human, there's essentials that you have to be aware of to live, to be able to have a fruitful life on planet Earth. And that is, you got to have oxygen. I mean, if you hold your breath, try holding your breath for 5 minutes. You won't make it, you know. And if you hold your breath too long, the body starts to break down. Bad things happen. You got to have food. If you don't nourish your body for energy, after a while, malnutrition sets in, body breaks down, and again, it can actually kill you. Same with water. You got to have water. God created it that way. If you don't intake water, it affects your brain, it affects your muscles, it affects your bones, it affects everything about your body, because the human is 60 to 70% water. You got to have it. Now, you can go seasons without it, but you can't go very long without water. Eventually, if you stop drinking water, it will deteriorate your body. Well, I got to thinking, there's got to be essentials to leadership, because I'm just growing in leadership. I want to develop, and I'm thinking through the filter. There has to be things, that are essential to leadership. And so I went on that journey just to think about it in my own life. And then, really, by the grace of God, it wasn't something that I ever tried to do, but all of a sudden I was rising into speaking levels and communicating levels where I was doing it both in the church world and in the business world. People were asking me to come and do leadership workshops or leadership seminars, and I'm still growing in it. So early on, I felt a little intimidated, thinking, hey, I'm still learning. And I found out we're always going to keep learning when you're in a level of leadership, because you lead yourself, you lead your family, you can lead a business, you can lead a church, you can lead a small group. Leadership has a vast experience to it that touches various people pockets. So one of the things in my travels, I'd always ask the question, hey, leaders, what do you think are some of the most important qualities that we need as a leader to be successful, to be effective? And I would jot down things that they said. And over many years, I'd look and say, wow, how familiar all of us, even if we didn't know each other, we were in different countries, like Jimmy, who's on this call. We were being in different countries, raised in different parts of the country, or even in different social classes. If they rose to any level of leadership, it was amazing how we began to realize, as leaders, there's essential qualities to be effective. And one of them tonight that I'm going to talk about is courage. Courage is an essential quality, and here's why. The reason that courage is needed to be effective in your leadership is because courage is going to be needed to do the right or the needed thing when it's uncomfortable. Leadership allows you to have influence in people's lives. We talked about that on a few days ago in our leadership challenge. But when they give you influence in their lives and you go on a journey together, there will be some rough waters. There's going to be personality differences. There's going to be perspective differences. there's going to be things that are going to crop up that you're not even actually prepared for. And it's going to require courage to do the right or needed thing, not to just do what's popular. Because being a courageous leader doesn't mean you're making the popular call. It means you're making the right call, the needed call for the organization, the needed call for the team to flourish, the needed call for the individual that you're developing. And those needed calls and right calls, especially when you're developing people, will require courageous conversations because you will have to speak into things that you're going to feel a little apprehension. You're going to get pushback. You may have a bad experience with working with people. They may blow up. They may cry. They may make you feel bad. And the reality is, good leaders, really effective leaders, know that courage is an essential quality in order to help their team grow, the organization to grow, and people to grow, and even yourself to grow. So I kind of want to talk about that. And what I'm going to do, first of all, is I want to ask you, and I want to welcome your feedback right now. Give me what you think is when I say the word courage, just courage, what comes to your mind? Courage. What comes to your mind?
The courage to be able to confront somebody, and I believe it's out of compassion, and yet they don't receive it that way. It is the hardest thing that I've ever had to face with one-on-one or with a couple or a team. It's just
I
it's
appreciate
just
that, Frank, and I like how you entered that, what you were sharing, how you got to have compassion, because that is the truth. When you genuinely care for people, you genuinely care, whether it's family members, staff members, your church, business, you really care for people. It does require that compassion to have a courageous conversation, because if you don't, you see that there could be some very rough times ahead for that person. There could be demise for that person. They could be in danger of losing their job, right? And how it's going to impact their family. So it does take compassion, but the compassion is needed in order to have a courageous conversation. That was great. Thank you, Frank. Anybody else, when I say courage, what comes to your mind?
I think that for me, one of the things that stands out is when you know something's the right decision before you even have the conversation. You're anticipating how people are going to respond just based on previous history. But you still, like you said, you do the right thing because it's the right thing. And you have to understand, I think really the power of a leader is understanding that there might be collateral damage, but if it's the right thing, you still do it anyway.
Hmm, excellent. Anybody else? When I say courage, what comes to your mind as a leader?
Uh, as for me, I think to be strong when you are reading people, because sometimes when you communicate something unto people, some develop resistance, and you shouldn't fear. You need to move forward with what we want to achieve as you lead people.
Hmm. Thank you, Jimmy. Anyone else want to comment on when I say courage, what comes to your mind?
the conflict that occurs, or actually probably that I'm anticipating, and you just get that in your gut feeling, and it's just a terrible thing to face.
Yeah, and I think that over time, leaders gain that sensitivity that they know a conflict is coming or a conversation needs to be had. They can sense that. And you're correct. It does take courage to know, how do I navigate through this? Because, as Denise mentioned, there could be collateral damage, but you still got to do it. You got to do the right thing. And the right thing, it isn't because you're intending for that, but you just know that that is a possibility that could happen. I'm going to give you a working definition that I have for courage. You can certainly, claim it for yourself, write it down. But for me, just walking through the years, both in the nonprofit and in the business community, and working with so many people, I don't even know how many people I've hired over the years, and how many people I've even had to release over the years, and how many teams that I've worked with in various places. So I sit down, and for me, I define courage as the ability and strength to make the conscious choice to do the right thing. And I'll say it again, because I'll define it a little bit more. I'll kind of broaden that out. I define courage as the ability and strength to make the conscious choice to do the right thing. I say ability in that I've known leaders that had the ability to forecast a negative situation, and knew they needed to address it. They just didn't have the strength to do it. And I think you need both, because it's not just a bull in a china shop. You got to have an ability that grows. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute, because courage is something that it gets developed. Nobody has this like super strength of courage because they're born that way. It may some may come off that way. But if that is not tempered and matured, it can come off like a bull in a china shop. So it's not really courage. It could be manipulation or force. And so it's not necessarily courage. Here's what I know, just as a leader, is I know leaders are going to face various pressures that will challenge their ability to do the right thing. That's why I say it's the ability and strength to make the conscious choice. It wasn't a impulse. It wasn't I flew off the handle, or I just gravitated to what I think is the best. It's a conscious choice. I had a chance to think about it. I had a chance to know what's the right thing. I have to determine what's the right thing for the organization, for the team, for the person, for the relationship. What really is the right thing, whether they see it that way or not. Because if I'm in a leadership role, the company, the president who put me in that is expecting me to make the right call. The team who may look to me is expecting me to make the right call if I have one toxic player. They're expecting it of me. So I need to have both the ability and strength to make the conscious choice that I'm going to walk into this, since they're looking at me, so that I know what the right thing is, because there are many challenges that we're going to face. And here's what I find. And again, I'm just using me being transparent and vulnerable. I find the most common challenges that leaders face is when they have to work through personal weakness or personal insecurities to address something. They have to work through the self-interest that they have, and have to put the team interest or the organization's mission interest above their own. And that a leader is going to face that. They're going to be confronted with that. Do I give in to pride or selfishness or ego? Or do I yield myself to truly be a servant, to be able to guide the church, guide the team? Am I truly respecting the position that I'm in to honor the values of the organization that I represent? And knowing that at times I'm going to have to navigate those conversations or decisions, and I'm going to have to do it even through my personal weakness and insecurities, because that's how I will grow and when I will grow in courage. If I don't face those, if I avoid those, I will not allow this quality to get developed in me. And that's the uncomfortable side of this quality, is that it has to be developed. It isn't just automatic because you're in a leadership role. It gets developed. So here's a couple of thoughts that I want to share about that whole dynamic, because as leaders face those challenges about working through their personal weaknesses, those insecurities that they may not even voice, but they know are there, and they got to work through them to promote the best interest of the team or a player, not themselves. Here's what I found. Courage is not the absence of fear. Now, I know people have said that, and I've heard it for years, but I'm going to give a different approach to this, because I've heard people say, well, you can grow in courage, that fear it isn't there. Well, I'm just being honest. I don't know that place. I think courage addresses fear, because the more your weaknesses or insecurities are exposed, the more fearful or anxious you get. And what courage does on your growth journey as a leader, it looks your fear right in the face and knows, but this is the right thing to do. And you press through the fear to do the right thing. You acknowledge the fear. We're not saying it doesn't exist. You acknowledge it, but it doesn't pull you back to not address. It doesn't move you into kind of feeding the insecurity. It doesn't do that. What it does is it acknowledges the insecurity or the weakness, and it presses through it to do the right thing, to keep things moving forward. That's what courage does. I look at the fear, I address it, I recognize that it's there. I'm not saying it'll never go away, it might, but I have just made up my mind that I'm not going to put myself in a place that I'm going to move forward when the fear's not there. Because now, when I was young in leadership, I used to do that, and it never turned out. I mean, I was always disappointed in myself, disappointed in the outcome, disappointed because I didn't address something that I knew needed to be addressed. And I just began to realize, wait a minute, that no matter how much I grow as a leader, there will always be those situations where fear is going to be present, that intimidation is going to feel there. And it's very real. But a leader recognizes it, it acknowledges it, but it presses forward anyway, because it knows this is the right thing to do, regardless of whether it's popular or somebody's going to like it or they're going to respond favorable. I know it's the right thing to do for them or for the company or for the family, whatever dynamic you want to put, that whatever that group is that you're leading, to do the right thing. Another thought about courage is that courage must be developed. And again, it's not going to be developed without having to face challenges, because that's where courage gets developed, is in the place of the challenge. Courage is not this super high emotion. Woo, yeah, I'm going to do it. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing for leaders, but I wouldn't want to put courage as an emotion that you feel great about. Courage is literally something that you need to develop. It's kind of a leadership muscle, and I'll explain it this way. Any of you that have ever ridden a bike, you worked on weights, any kind of exercise program for health development, there are various levels in order to develop. I mean, I remember when I first was riding a stationary bike, and I went to work out with somebody who worked out regularly, and they said, "Do you think you can ride that for 12 minutes?" And I laughed. I said, "I used to ride a 10-speed bike for miles. Oh, this is easy. I can ride that." Now, remember, this is my first time actually getting on a stationary bike. I never rode a stationary bike before. Man, I'm huffing and puffing at 5 minutes, and I'm at level like 1 or 2. And the gentleman comes over and he laughs at me. He goes, "Well," he said, "it looks like the stationary bike's beating you." And I went, "Well, I mean, I've ridden a bike, but I've never ridden a stationary bike." And he told me, "Well, it gets easier over time." Same thing if you've ever done anything lifting weights, right? The weight can be 10 pounds, 15 pounds, 20 pounds, whatever you started with. And there's resistance. The weight has resistance. And what are you doing? You're pushing against the resistance. That's how courage gets developed. You have to push against the resistance of the fear, of the weakness, of the intimidation, of the low self-esteem. You got to push against it. And that resistance could be at 5 pounds, 10 pounds. And the more you push against it, the more your courage gets developed, and it will grow to face higher levels of challenge, which comes, that's how leaders get promoted. You know, at every level that you get promoted to, whether it's in business or in the church world and nonprofit, or even just promoted in that you've gone to another level of growth, you'll face more intense challenges that you would have backed away from sometime else. Courage can be developed, and it needs to be developed. And you got to remember that as a leader. This is a quality like all of them. This one gets developed, though, through resistance. I have to press against the resistance just like you would with exercising to different weight levels. The more endurance and the more consistency that you apply, you'll see your length of time be able to grow in your workout, and you'll see that the weight resistance will also grow. But it didn't start there. Okay. Anybody have any comments or questions on anything I've mentioned so far about courage is not the absence of fear, and that courage must be developed?
So I was thinking, I wrote it down, is, Frank and I both mentioned like just the anticipation of what could come and what it could cost. But so I wrote down, it may cost you something, but we have to understand that there's going to be a cost either way. And sometimes in the awareness of what's the bigger cost, what's the long-term cost, yes, you might lose a person, but to your point, if you keep a toxic person and you lose your 4 good people, like we get to pick what the cost is. And so that helps fortify the courage to go, okay, either way, it's going to cost me something. I just get to pick what it's going to cost.
That is a great observation and comment, because that is so true, especially when you're working with a team. If you end up neglecting addressing a conversation, let's say a toxic staff person, or even somebody, even if they're not toxic, if you don't address a bad behavior, something that is negatively impacting, the team, if it goes unaddressed, the team will have their own private conversations within their own mind that will end up spewing over to attitudes that may be directed toward you because you're not addressing it, even if they don't say it. So to Denise's point, I mean, you get to pick. They're both going to be hard. And that's the resistance. That's why I mentioned courage is only developed when there's resistance, when there's a negative resistance present. It's not just developed because you read a book, feel good, memorize something, wrote it down, and even say, yes, I'm going to do it. You have to have some confrontation with a negative situation, a fear, an intimidation, a conversation that you don't want to have because that's maybe not your personality. I like to always make people happy, and you're not going to make everybody happy, but yet you got to address that. That's how it gets developed. So that's a great point. It is going to cost you one way or the other. And I'll say this, John Maxwell, I'm going back to 30 years ago, near there. And I remember I'm pastoring a small church, but the church is growing, and we're seeing, more influential people in the business community coming to the church. And that was, I was excited about it. And I remember John having a conversation with me, and he said, here is probably a point where you need to be aware of this, because if you're not, it could hurt your leadership and definitely hurt the growth of where the church is going. And I said, okay. And he said, let me explain it to you this way. He said, I'm going to use people's growth and I'm going to put numbers on them just to help clarify the point. And I said, okay. He said, if you've got somebody who in their spirituality or in their life experience, they're at a level 3 or 4. They are only able to influence and lead people who are like at 1 and 2s. And he said, if you put them because they're available or because they whine or because they ask to be in a position, and you place them in a leadership position, and people who are 5s, 6s, and 7s end up going to that group, they won't stay. And then they might not even stay at the church because you put those people in that position. So it'll reflect on your leadership. And I'll never forget what he said. He said, Ron, always remember this. 6s and 7s don't ever follow 2s and 3s. They don't. The reason they don't is they know 2s and 3s do not understand life and life's experiences and life's values at that level. They've never gotten that far. So they can only see from their vantage point, which is a 2 or a 3. So they'll try to
Hey, Ron.
Yes.
If I can, and I'm sorry I missed the first couple of sessions, but this is a very interesting topic because leadership is inherently a group issue, right? 2s and 3s don't know they're 2s and 3s.
You were so right. You can't call them that because they will feel belittled. And John wasn't saying that to belittle. He was just saying, I'm trying to help you understand by using numbers. So I'm sorry.
So no, this is a great conversation because, I spent my youth in the military, and, I spent my youth in a job in the military where stereotypical leadership is meant to reveal itself, right? You're or you're combat in your leader about the spectrum of leadership is harder. Courage in leadership is harder to define. Courage under fire, easy. You can make a movie about that, right? You can put that on camera and you can show what courage in leadership looks like. It's much harder in the scenario that you just mentioned. And this is why it's important, I think, for those of us who aspire to leadership to your point, to condition it, to train it, to pay attention to it, to be conscious about the things that leadership looks like for us. Courage in leadership means, to me, it means not saying something that's socially comfortable when you know it to be wrong, right? And also walking the line, because leadership is a dynamic with other people. Leadership is not something leadership, right? Leadership is something you do in group, whether you've been assigned it, given it, or just assumed it because the group just inherently needed it. So I think that the points that you're making are very interesting, specifically around courage, and specifically at this time in the state of the world, right? The world needs strong leaders now more than it ever has.
Agreed.
And and what you're doing, I think, is important, right? Professionally, because I'm in a leadership position professionally, and in society, because I find myself around others who are leaders like you, who are making it a point to say, pay attention, folks, take notes, like build that muscle. So thank you for doing it. But there were 2 points there that I wanted to call out. Leadership is about others,
yep,
right? And courage in leadership is different than you might see in the movies. So pay attention, folks.
Right. And I really appreciate that, Mark. That's a great point, because that's the whole resistance that I'm saying. Like, you would understand that developing, when they're training you, because they know what's coming, they back it up from there and they train you in going through some harsh things, because it's going to be harsher when you get out there. And if you're not prepared for that, it could cost you your life or somebody else, right? Well, leaders, you have to be prepared because you're leading a group of people, and you're leading it because an organization has empowered you. They trusted you. Now, that group of people, when you're leading them, there's an expectation of an outcome that the organization has, or maybe even the team has. You have to help develop them and grow them. It's got to be about them to be able to get that outcome. It isn't you force them, make them feel bad, speak ill of them, or try to intimidate them to get them to do it. That's not good leadership. Now, I realize that does happen in our world today. That is not a leadership that I favor. And in my course, Leadership Essentials, I talk about poor styles of leadership. There are poor styles. Are they out there? Yes. Do people actually promote and teach them? Yes. I believe they're very poor styles and they need to be avoided, because this is about developing people. They're the most valuable asset in the world. Every group has people connected to it, and we have to be cognizant of that. So we're going to have to address some uncomfortable things. Now, let me say this, and then I want to open it up for discussion again, because here again, like I said, everybody knows that courage is needed in leadership, but it's a difficult thing to talk about because it can only be developed when there's resistance, when there's pressure, when there's challenges. That's the only way to develop it. And some people who get in leadership positions want to run from it. They love it because of the position they have, but they're only thinking about them and their promotion. They're not thinking about the people they're leading or the organization they're leading or the outcome that is supposed to be getting done because of their leadership. They're not thinking about that, right? So this is something, and I know that we'll all nod our head and we'll see it, but it isn't always as easy when you're in the heat of working with teams. And that's this: courage resists what is unethical or immoral. True courage in leadership will resist what is unethical or immoral. You can't build truth on lies. You can't build trust on manipulation. You can't. Because if they trust you, and the minute they find out you manipulated them, it's gone. I mean, almost overnight. Courage resists what is unethical or what is immoral. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. And I'm going to use my own just experiences that I went through. I've had multiple situations where leading a team, and this is both in nonprofit and in the business world, where the team gelled, they were doing well, but one player got off, started to gossip, maybe even pulled another person in, and all of a sudden the dynamic of the team is not gelling harmoniously. Now, they can communicate the mission statement, they can even tell you the tasks, they know what the checklist is, but something's not right. And the challenge then becomes, all right, if I don't address that, then would you call that unethical? Because what am I doing to the team that wants to grow, that actually, like in some cases, they want their bonus. They want this. And yet, if I've got a couple of people that are hindering this, they're immediately, even if they don't ever say it to you, they're looking to the leader to go, I'm hoping you're seeing this. Mm. And I hope that you're going to make the call, because if you don't see this, then they're going to start to question. And I know, matter of fact, you could do your own research. Don't even trust me. Do your research. Do you know that some of the majority of people who leave an organization leave because of a manager? They leave because a leader did not address something. They couldn't trust that leader. They let something go, or they had favorites. I mean, it's crazy, but it shows how valuable leaders are. And so if you don't address it, to me, I look at it, and I'm just saying it to me, I'm doing them like an unethical, that like they're expecting me to do this, to do the right thing. And if those people who are having those toxic conversations aren't willing to admit it or address it, I've got to be able to do something. I'm going to have to make a judgment call, whether that is I'm going to bring in more people that they've talked to, that they'll address it and say, yeah, you actually did say this to me. You know, how do I address it? Because that comes down to how to. I'm not going to become prejudiced, and just because they didn't accept what I said, then I'm going to say you're fired. But I'm going to have to address it, because if it's toxic, it's like putting a bad apple among a group of others. If you don't remove that bad apple, it's going to impact the others, whether you like it or not. So instead of having one bad apple, you're going to have 3 or 4 or 5. And when that happens within a team, well, everybody knows they replace the leader. That's what happens. They just pull out because they have to, because whoever put them in that is expecting them to have to address it. So I'm looking at it to say, if it's a staff member, if it's even in a volunteer setting in a church, I had to do that numerous times. These are volunteers. And it's not like you're paying them, they're giving their time. But if they're creating a toxic environment because they're gossiping about other people within the church or other people on the team, we have to be able to say, hey, folks, we need to talk about that. Everybody makes mistakes. This is what we do as a team. This is what our values are. This is how we handle this thing. And if they choose not to, then eventually you've got to ask them, then it would probably be better for you to serve somewhere else or not serve at all, because this is the ripple effect of what is occurring. And that's tough. I've had it where people have gone out and then talked about me and said how mean I was and how hard I was. And I can't believe he wasn't listening. And then, and I'm not exaggerating, years later, they came back to apologize to me, asked me to forgive them, said, told me, you're the best leader I've ever worked with. You covered me. You never even defended yourself. You just said, well, I'm sorry that they feel that way. But I had to address it and do the right thing for the team. And the team that was involved knew that it was the right thing. So, and I would always encourage them, please don't go out and propagate. Like, we always want to help cover people, not expose them. They'll expose themselves. I mean, if they continue down that road, you won't have to. They'll do it themselves. So let's just us do the right thing and keep moving in this direction and trust that by doing the right thing, it's going to move in the direction it's supposed to. I'll tell you another thing, and I'll give you a nonprofit example because this happened. I'm sharing it with you because of the topic, but I didn't talk about it with other people. I remember when I was traveling, and this is probably early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, I was speaking in a very, very large church over a weekend, and they had 4 services over the weekend. And all of these services, I mean, it was full of, I don't know how many. All I know is the church had many thousands who attended the church. And they asked me to come. And I spoke, and they said, what we'll do, this is what our custom is, we'll take up an honorarium for you in every service. I said, that's great, because I would go not asking for anything. I would say, I'm going to, like, if they would cover the expenses, that would be a blessing. But I didn't ask for anything. I said, whatever, do the right thing before God. Whatever the Lord says for you to do, then you do that, and we'll accept that. So we didn't charge anything, so to speak, as a number for an honorarium. Now, that doesn't make it right or wrong. I mean, that was just how I did it. So after those 4 services, and I sold resources that we had, that, the people who worked my table, we had them. And I remember when I left, the pastor gave me a check for $600. Now, I said nothing. I thanked him, prayed, thank you, Pastor, asking God's blessing on you. Thank you so much. And I had somebody who asked me about that because they said, this happened before, and I didn't want to get into it. And the gentleman said, I know what I gave in the offering to you, how the ministry, and that offering that they gave was more than the check I got, but I never told them. I never said, I said, that they did what they felt was right, and this is what we agreed to, and we thank the Lord. But I say that to you in that it's unethical. It's not right. I mean, that gentleman, one person out of all those, sowed more than what the whole check was that they gave me, but I never said anything. I wasn't going to make the church look bad. I wasn't going to make the pastor look bad. I wasn't going to put that. And yet that gentleman said, yeah, I've heard in the past. Well, what that told me is that other leaders or other ministers must have talked to that person. I'm not going to do that. Okay. I'm not going to do it because it's not the right thing to do. It would have been unethical on my part to do that because it would have exposed somebody, exposed an error. If I was going to do something like that, I would have talked to the pastor one-on-one individually, not through somebody else. I wasn't going to let that happen. And so I just said, everything is good, man, to that. Everything's good. It was good. Okay. Now, I'm not lying in that I was good. I truly was. I was shocked. I went, oh my gosh. But that, again, that was how they handled it. And that was between them and God, not something that I could deal with. But I'm sharing it with you in that you want to make sure that you don't go down roads verbally that start degrading other people or agreeing with somebody who is degrading. That's not our place. You can say that you don't agree with it and that you wouldn't do it. But the minute we start attacking people personally, we can address issues without attacking people. And that's just the stance that I want to take. I can disagree with them, but I'm not going to attack them because they're responsible for their decision. But I can speak to an issue and say, I wouldn't personally choose to do that for this. But again, that's their call. If that's their call, this is what I'm going down. I don't want to cause and I call it an unethical approach to leadership, because the minute you start bad mouthing people, it almost gives fuel to people who want to badmouth other people. And I just don't. I don't see that as a right course of action. So I'd rather do the right thing morally, ethically, relationally, like do the right thing so that the example that you set, people can look to and go, I can trust them. Because at the end of the day, really, as leaders, that's what we want. We want to earn people's trust so that they will work with us, that together we're going in a certain direction as a team, and trust is going to be needed. I'll just say one more thing, and then I'm going to let you guys ask me questions or give me your feedback. And that is, courageous leaders will always have to work through mistakes and setbacks. And that includes even our own, because you're going to make mistakes and you're going to have setbacks. They're not intentional, but they're going to happen, because along the journey, it just happens. We're not perfect. We're still learning. We're still growing, which is why ongoing improvement is constantly something we want to be cognizant of, because you're going to be, I'd love to tell you, you're not going to make a mistake for the rest of your life. All you got to do is read this book, take this. It's not going to happen. And sometimes other people are going to make mistakes, and other people are going to have setbacks. And courageous leaders have to work through both. Other people making mistakes, other people having setbacks, and yet you believe in them. You're going to give them another chance. And then you making mistakes and you having setbacks. It happens. And courage is going to have to work through that, because if you don't, what you're going to say to yourself is, I'm no longer qualified to be a leader because I said this, or I did this, or I handled it this way. Well, I don't know a leader that's great, that I would look up to, that hasn't made some pretty bad mistakes, but they've learned to press through them, and myself included. I've had to learn to look at those and go, I wish I never would have said that. I wish I wouldn't have responded that way. And it'll eat your lunch. But if you let it eat your lunch, it'll start eating your brain. It'll start eating your thoughts. It'll start eating your heart. And all of a sudden, now it's going to be very hard to lead. So the courageous factor doesn't show up, because after all, I did this. Well, courage has to look at setbacks and mistakes and press through them, because you're going to make them, and so are the people that you lead. Okay. So anybody got questions for me or any feedback on anything we discussed so far? Because it's been a good night.
I have, one of the things I thought of from a different paradigm than what we've talked about is, it takes a courageous leader to be open to ideas of your team, meaning to embrace them and realize you don't know everything. And I think it parallels with like humility and security, that you do have to be courageous to maybe have somebody, to be open enough to have somebody help you see your blind side. Sometimes, have you thought about this? And it's, rather than getting defensive or turning people away, being courageous enough to say, you're right. Maybe I can see it from that angle. But also, I think that when it makes you approachable, and it helps people have buy-in because they feel heard and like their feedback is valued. So that was what I would say. But you said something I couldn't write fast enough. You said courage doesn't resist it resists what's unethical and immoral, because you can't build trust on life. And then you said one other thing. Did you just say that out of flow, or do you have that written down somewhere?
No, yeah, and you can't. I also building like trust on manipulation. Like,
okay,
you're not going to develop a chemistry of harmony and trust if you have manipulated people to do something, and then they find out that you manipulated. Because that's I guess for me, I just say, but that's lying. You didn't tell them the truth. How do people follow people that manipulate? After a while, they can be very likable. They can be likable people. But if the team doesn't trust them, if people don't trust you, that's the greatest honor of leadership, is that people will trust you. And that's the whole point, is that I want to be found trustworthy. Doesn't mean they agree with everything I say or every way I think, but they trust me. They know that I am acting in their best interest, in the organization's best interest, and I need to show them that over time. It doesn't happen overnight. I mean, trust is one of those things that is earned. It's never guaranteed. But if you manipulate people or you lie to them, it's hard to gain trust back when that happens because it stings, you know. So doesn't mean it can never happen. I'm not going to say that. I'm sure that it can, but that leader's got to work really hard, to gain that back. And so that's what I meant by that is, it's to be courageous when I'm talking about it from an unethical or immoral standpoint is meaning the immoral part is even that, like, don't take advantage of people's weaknesses, emotions, hard times to get them to do something because that's what you want. That's I don't know, at least for me, it's just like it makes you feel bad inside going, that's not right. So
that's good. Thank you.
Yeah, Jimmy, were you going to share something?
I wanted to ask because I've heard you saying that courage is developed when resistance, fear, or challenge uh, is noticed. So, should we say courage is an element uh, to overcome fear, resistance, and the like?
I like your idea. I would say it's not, it could overcome, yes. I like to say it presses through it. Courage, because I recognize the fear. I recognize that there could be intimidation. I wonder, could I really do that? What happens if they get mad? What happens if it doesn't turn out the way that I would like it? I think those questions, even if a leader doesn't voice them, it revolves in their mind. So I'll acknowledge that they're there, but I think courage is that muscle, that leadership muscle that presses through those, even though it's present, because it knows this is the right course of action. It's the right thing to do or the needed thing to do. And therefore, I have to step up and do it or say it or lead in that area. I hope that was it. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? Woohoo! Well, anyway, this was a great lesson because, and even on the Leadership Essentials course, I share that to go, this is something that everybody knows as a leader they need it. But the minute you start understanding what it means to have this essential quality developed in your life, it's challenging, man. It's challenging. It's not easy, but it is necessary. And the more, yeah, go ahead.
Ron, I think Brian had a comment. I was eager to hear what he had to say.
Cool.
I did have one small takeaway, and it was something that you said that just resonated in my head, and something that I heard from you and Denise quite a few years ago, as an encouragement to my wife and my faith, and relationship and ministry. But it was to everything there is a deposit and a withdrawal, and the takeaway I got from this was for your courage to grow, you have to sacrifice your fear. So for you to overcome something, you have to sacrifice something, whether it's time, whether it's money, whether it's effort. And that's, for me, fear is the sacrificial component to the growth of courage.
That's excellent. Thank you for sharing that because that's so true. The deposit withdrawal, that was excellent. Yeah. Because courage, without anything presenting a challenge, resistance, an obstacle, courage isn't needed. I mean, courage is something that is just going to have to, knows it's got to do the right thing, but there's some form of pushback somewhere, whether it's within the leader himself, within what he thinks is going to be or her, the outcome that could possibly be there, or a fallout, but they still, they do the right thing for the benefit of individuals or a team or an organization or a ministry to grow. You got to do the right thing. Thank you. That was excellent. Appreciate that very much. All right. So tomorrow night's going to be our last of the 5-day leadership challenge. And it's one of the, I love all of them, but tomorrow night is going to be really, really good. I'm going to talk about how do leaders keep themselves sharp? How do you keep your edge sharp? Because just because you were able to do something once doesn't mean you can cut through it. By reason of use, a blade or a knife gets dull just by reason of use. So if you're doing something a lot, how do you keep yourself sharp so you don't get dull in your leadership skills? And we'll talk about that tomorrow night.
Ron,
yeah.
I have, if I could ask something here.
Yeah.
We touched on something here about how the courageous leader will always have to walk through their setbacks and their mistakes. A courageous leader is open to other suggestions. How do I, I've heard John Maxwell say this, and I cannot make it work. He says, sit down and say, how am I doing? How can you actually get people to open up and make suggestions? I want to work on myself. I want to see how they're perceiving me or what they would like me to work on. But how do I say this in a way that is authentic? I mean it, but I can't seem to get them to actually make those suggestions. I want to be open to it.
That's a great question. And I would say that I myself have gone through that, where you're looking for feedback from people that you're working with and leading. And sometimes the feedback they give you is everything's great. And you're actually wanting to hear something that you could refine to be better in. And so you almost walk away like, well, that didn't help. But the other side to it is that they could be being very sincere, because from where the seat that they're sitting in, they think everything is fine.
Oh, okay.
So what my suggestion would be is that's why you have leaders that I call them reach up relationships. That's when you develop those reach up relationships where you're able to talk with them. They may even be able to witness certain things, that if they're in your community or they're friends, those reach up relationships can be very helpful. And then eventually, as your team is developing, it could just be the question to go, I'm really like, I want to improve. I want to help get better. And boy, you guys or folks could help me with any feedback. Is there anything that you see that you feel that would be helpful for me, that here's an area that I could either improve in or better develop? If they don't say anything, thank you. Okay. Well, if you do, please, let me know, because I am open to that. I want to grow. I want to continue to grow, and I'm encouraging you to do the same, but we need feedback. They could be intimidated to give you that because you could be their leader, their pastor. They don't want to share that with you. So I would go with the reach up relationships, because that's what I did early on. When I was pastoring small church, good people. But I went through the same thing. They were like, no, everything, this is wonderful, this is great. And so I'm looking for those reach up relationships that I could have conversations with to say, I don't know that I'm doing this the best way. And, how do you do it? And it just is a conversation that is being had, and suggestions that may be made in that conversation that could sharpen your awareness of something to go, I'm going to try that, so I would go there. Don't make them feel that they have to comment if they're not even comfortable doing it. So,
okay.
Yeah, it's because it is tough. It's tough when I see that more in the church world than I do in the business community.
Yeah. Last week, it was Jimmy James who said at the end of your communication, he said, "Is feedback important?"
Yeah, yeah, Jimmy. Yes, yes, it is. Yes, it is. It is important. Hey guys, gals, great. Thank you for all
Thank
the
you.
feedback tonight. And again, want to make sure that you're aware of this because that door is going to close relatively quickly. And that is, if you are interested in that Leadership Essentials course, go to the Marry the Vision site under Leadership Essentials. There is a code, and I didn't put it in the chat. Let me do it again so that it is in the chat so that you have it. But there is a code that you'll get $50 off the regular price until they stop that. And that will be coming to a close rather quickly. Let's see, chat. Here we are. I'll put it in here. There you go. So, and it's, if you go where it's just with the code early bird 50, that's all you got, to early bird 50. That'll it'll save you. And just want to make sure you're aware of it. Okay, folks, tomorrow night, 7 o'clock. I'm sure they'll take this session tonight. They'll have it in a format where people could view it. But again, appreciate every single one of you and the feedback that you gave. This will be a great session for other people to watch who couldn't make the call, because your feedback really made the difference in this session tonight. So thank you for it. Really made it special. All right. All right. Love you guys. All right. And gals. Woohoo. Okay. Hopefully I'll see you tomorrow night.